Everybody has been talking about condo crisis, condo wars, insurance crisis.
I don't think that we are in an Armageddon situation. There are issues, and as with anything in society, we work to address those issues as a community.
Hi, I'm Carlos from Owner, and today we get to interview one of my favorite people in the industry, my friend Robbie Blanche. Robbie, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Robbie Blanche, and aside from being one of Carlos's favorite people in the industry, I'm also a shareholder at the law firm of Siegfried Rivera.
Awesome. Robbie, well, thank you very much for taking the time. Driving from Coral Gables, I'm sure, is a long drive to Little Haiti. So let me ask you something. And it's been, everybody has been talking about condo crisis, condo wars, insurance crisis, HOA fraud happening all over the place, all over the news. How did we get to where we are? Can you just give us maybe a synopsis of, how it is that we're there, where we're here?
It's interesting because I've been doing this for about 24 years now, and I don't remember a time during which there hasn't been some type of crisis or some type of issue. There have always been situations going on in condos and homeowner associations. And what you tend to find is that, or at least what I've found, is that as information has become more prevalent and as there has been more awareness by stakeholders in community associations, by unit owners, by the government making information more available and accessible, by organizations such as the Community Association Institute, and many of the other local neighborhood associations that cater and govern, associations within their local market areas. You start having a population that is more educated and more aware of the things that are going on. Granted, in addition to this, we hear the horror stories about fraud in some communities. We hear about, elections being taken hostage. We hear about funds being taken from associations, insurance premiums increasing astronomically. I don't think that we are in an Armageddon situation. There are issues, and as with anything in society, we work to address those issues as a community. But I believe it's more about the awareness that people have and the proliferation of media, social media and other type of media streams that bring these issues to everybody's attention. You mentioned the insurance crisis and the insurance issue, and who's to say what caused the insurance premiums to be as high as there are? We can have debates that are never ending as to what caused that. But we have hopefully some legislation that will be introduced at some point. We know the legislature met last year to try to find some type of relief for the associations and for other citizens. And, God willing, we'll have some more of that in the years to come.
So it looks like oversight is one of the big themes that we're seeing. And I am assuming, this arises from the Champlain South tragedy. What are some of the things or legislations that you're seeing that are coming out in 2024 that our audience should be in the lookout?
It's interesting because immediately after the unfortunate incident of the collapse of the Champlain Tower South condo, there was a lot of expectation that the legislature would come out immediately and legislate some type of new laws that would be aimed to avoid what many perceive to be some of the contributing factors, or what could have been contributing factors of that catastrophe.
Such as?
Well, I mean, one of the laws that passed, and coincidentally, it didn't pass immediately after, but there was a special session that was established. There was a special session that was convened by the legislature following the prior legislative session. And during that session, the legislature adopted the concept of the milestone inspections and the requirement for structural integrity reserve reports. Subsequent to the establishment of those concepts, the legislature has again met to come up with new changes and some revisions to the, let's call them tweaks, to the legislation that was adopted And then now we're currently, in January, a new legislative session was convened. And now the legislature has had other bills introduced. And within those bills, there continue to be some efforts to fine tune the concepts of the structural integrity reserves. And there are other concepts that are introduced in these bills as well.
Can you give us an idea on what are some of those?
Yeah, I mean,
bills
the bills are pretty voluminous, so we're clearly not going to get into all of the detail of these bills. But for instance, House Bill 1021 has a companion bill, Senate Bill 1178, and within that bill, it's a bill that exceeds 100 some odd pages. But within those bills, you find proposed legislation that will address official records. They will address other concerns to associations like conflicts of interest, both between directors and managers. You'll find other issues such as hurricane protection and trying to simplify some of hurricane protection devices or improvements in property that exist in condos. You will also see attempts by the legislature, for instance, to reduce the website requirements. And what I mean by that is currently all condos that are 150 units or more are required to have a website and post on that website certain information and documentation. Well, in this proposed legislation now, they're introducing some revisions that aim to reduce the size of the condos from 150 to 25, so that condos with 25 or more units are required to have these websites and post and whatnot. There are other issues within those two bills that I mentioned that are also going to be addressed. And we will see what happens in this process. For instance, they're seeking to create like investment committees, because a lot of associations feel that they should have more liberal standards with regard to how they invest funds that they have accumulated in their accounts. We know now, right? The reserves. They're a lot of associations now more than ever are going to start accumulating reserves. Well, what is a correct, a safe, a prudent, a responsible investment vehicle within which these funds can be invested? So these committees that the legislation aims to establish or at least allow would serve those purposes. Similarly, the certification process for board members is another thing that some legislators feel needs to be a little more strict. For instance, there are some people who speculate that if directors were better educated and more informed on the laws and on their obligations, then there would be less issues going on with condos. Now, people that are against that type of legislation balance out those concerns and say, look, board members are volunteer individuals. They're not getting paid for what they're doing. And to impose additional requirements on them will make matters worse and will deter interested board members to volunteer for the association service.
So it would make it harder for volunteers to want to volunteer, and especially for those, who already, are kind of, reduced on time, to be able to contribute to those boards. Robbie, what is the biggest misconception that people have about your role, about what you do as an association attorney? I know that.
Before we get to the misconceptions, I also wanted to highlight two other bills.
Oh, please, absolutely.
Two other bills that were filed and are pending. And I think that one of them in particular is very important because associations have to provide responses to estoppel certificate requests. Anytime an owner is going to sell a unit or refinance a unit, or at any other time, they can request that the association provide estoppel certificates wherein the association is making representations, binding representations with regard, for instance, to the amount of money that is owed for that unit and other violations that exist. And if you
just to explain, estoppel request meaning making sure that whoever's selling a unit doesn't owe any money to that association. Getting a certificate for that is changing in what way?
Well, they're changing it because right now the real estate industry, the title companies, the title agents, people that are involved in closings, feel that condominium associations and homeowner associations are charging too much to prepare these documents. And so the proposed legislation, and those viewers can look at House Bill 979 and Senate Bill 278. In those bills, they're seeking to preclude associations from being able to charge others for drafting and providing these estoppel certificates. It doesn't take away the obligation for the association to draft them,
Okay.
but rather it takes away the association's ability to charge for that. And the consequence of that is, who do you think is going to be paying for these?
Sounds to me like the realtor lobbying, one got to Tallahassee before the CAI lobbyists did.
The real estate industry does have a very powerful voice in the Tallahassee, and it is important for those who have an issue with this. And I know CAI has voiced large opposition to this with the legislators, and we'll see what happens. But it's important to note that these are bills; these are not laws.
Okay.
This is just proposed legislation. As with until March, we're not going to know what happens with these. They may go through any number of changes. They may die as bills. They may not become law. And so it's what's important for our viewers and for citizens to keep in mind is they need to be aware of what's going on.
So this is the time to get engaged.
This is the time to become engaged.
Okay.
This is the time to reach out to your elected officials, to your representatives in Tallahassee, to your senators, and voice your opinion and your concerns as to what the implications of the legislation that they're considering for adoption might have on you as an owner. The last of these bills, which is of importance, and you mentioned previously fraud in community associations, and there has been a lot of this. I represent hundreds of associations, and I can tell you it is very few that have even had the suspicion of fraud within their community. So I don't want to sound alarms. I don't want to make it seem as if fraud is rampant in community associations. But when it does strike, it is severe.
It's loud.
And it really hurts those in particular that are owners within those communities, many of whom are probably living paycheck to paycheck. So in Senate Bill 426, there is the proposal to create a program that is going to be referenced as the Condominium Fraud Investigation Pilot Program. It's a mouthful, but this program again is aimed to provide a channel and resources to investigate, address, and combat fraud that is alleged to exist in many of the community associations.
So this is like giving teeth to enforcement, to be able to enforce some of these issues that are happening. Hammocks, example.
For many years, there were claims, there were suggestions that law enforcement was without resource and without the remedy or the ability to pursue a lot of the fraud that was being experienced in condominium and homeowner associations. So a few years back, the legislature created a lot of criminal penalties with regard to some of the things that were being experienced in some of the communities. This effort continues to be ongoing. And the most recent of these efforts, I would say, is the filing of Senate Bill 426. Again, something important for community association stakeholders to be aware of and to follow.
Awesome. Well, let's all be attentive. Let's make sure we stay on top and we connect with our elected officials to ensure that our voices are being heard. Well, Robbie, my last question to you is: what are the misconceptions that people have about what you do as an association attorney? I know that there's a lawyer for everything out there, but what you do is very specific. Can you tell us some of the misconceptions and maybe explain to us exactly what your role is within this industry?
I can't speculate as to what the misconceptions are, but I can tell you that, I've been representing community associations and I've been in this field for about 24 years now. And there's not a day that goes by in my practice that I am not learning new things. So it's an ever evolving field. It's also highly specialized. You shouldn't. It's so specialized that the Florida Bar has created its own certification class for attorneys that work in community association. And so while any lawyer could handle some association or many association issues, there are some who are considered to be specialists in the field. And that's when you're designated with board certification, you are considered to be an expert in the field. And myself, as well as many of my other partners at the firm, are fortunate enough to have obtained that classification, that certification. But many folks might feel that what we do is simple, in the sense that, some board members, some managers, some owners feel that, they can just go ahead and sign a contract. They can just go ahead and do certain revisions to the condominium property. And many times, it's funny, I'll hear clients, they'll call me, well, my neighbor's community has been doing this practice for years, and they have never gotten in trouble. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, you can walk into banks and hold up the bank and steal money. If you're not getting caught and nobody's, following you, you can probably continue getting away with it. But the fact that you've been doing something and getting away with it doesn't mean that it is appropriate, doesn't mean that it is legal. It's also important that lawyers are not there to say yes to their clients. Boards, unit owners may have this misconception that the association counsel is the puppet and an extension and a weapon of the board. And all too often, our job is a difficult one, because some clients may have a certain objective, and as counsel for the association, you represent the association. You don't represent the board individually. It is the board that contacts you. It is the board that authorizes you to do things and that requests for you to look into certain matters. But as the attorney for the association, you need to give the board proper and sound advice. And so board members need to be aware of that and be patient and tolerant with their lawyers. So that probably is another issue that we oftentimes also have to deal with. And last but not least, associations, board members, managers need to be a little more frank, blunt, upfront with their attorneys. If there are issues with regard to costs for certain legal services, they should have that conversation prior to requesting the service. I would prefer to take a few minutes of time with my client when they introduce certain concepts to me or certain ideas that they might have. And if it seems to me that they're going to be jumping off of a cliff, I'd rather hold them back and prevent them from doing that prior to them, jumping off that cliff. And then we've got to
which affects the entire association.
And it affects the entire association. So, it may be easier to avoid concerns and problems by reaching out to qualified and experienced condominium and homeowner association legal counsel prior to embarking upon the wrong action or an inappropriate action, or which could potentially be very costly to the association and involve the association in greater legal liability, which at the end can be even more costly to the association than had they just, reached out and had an upfront discussion and sought the opinion from their attorneys.
Well, excellent. With that, I think it's time for us to close this episode. I thank you very much for the advice, for your friendship, for coming to our offices. Next time we go to yours. And until next time, thank you very much.
Always invited to my office. Happy to come and happy to have you at mine.
Mean cortadito, this guy can make.
Thank you very much.